251ers. We're back. Wait, what does that say? George! That's ridiculous. Sometimes I don't know what's wrong with that guy. Today, we're going to finish talking about marine pollution. We're going to talk about other types of pollution. So we talked about oil spills, and we've talked about nutrient pollution or eutrophication in the last few lectures. And today you're going to have a kind of a whirlwind tour through other types of pollution, including sewage sludge, gross, and DDT and PCBs. And if you don't know what those are, you're going to find out. Mercury, not Freddie Mercury, mercury the element, which is quite toxic, and plastics. So sewage sludge, sorry about that, sewage sludge, snake around the floor over there, is the semi-solid material that remains after sewage treatment. Okay, so we live, well, some of us live here in College Station, and Bryan, and in Texas in general, if you have a little bit of land or if you live a little bit outside of town, you might actually have, not just Texas, anywhere that you live in the US, but if you have a little bit of land, you might have a septic system. I had one growing up. I have one now. I did not have one in Los Angeles. I tend to not have them inside city limits, but if you live a little bit out, you might have a septic system, and the same process happens in your backyard in a septic system. So the semi-solid material that remains after sewage treatment is basically after sewage has been chlorinated and basically dried. It contains human waste, oil, zinc, copper, lead, silver, mercury, pesticides, and more goodies, as I like to call them. So basically a bunch of stuff that's kind of gross. I mean, but that's part of people and organisms make waste, and that's part of life. Okay, so that's what sewage sludge is. It's basically after sewage has been treated, you have this kind of semi-solid material. So semi-solid means it can slowly dissolve. That's left over. Primary treatment of sewage. Sewage solids are allowed to settle and de-water, and in secondary treatment, that sludge is exposed to bacteria-killing chlorine, right? And this is what happens in a septic system. Usually it's 2 tanks. If it's an aerobic septic system, like the ones that I know a little better, if it's 2 tanks, the first one, solids are settling and dewatering, and the second one, they are being chlorinated. And the bacteria in the first one help break down the sewage a little bit. Okay, so why are we talking about this? Oh, gross. So we're talking about this because it's a pollution problem in the oceans. So here we can see in a map, Long Island, again, where I grew up, New Jersey, where I went to graduate school, Philadelphia, which is in Pennsylvania, where I lived when I was in graduate school, and Connecticut, where there's a lot of white people, in Delaware, where I had an ex-girlfriend, and Maryland, where one of my best friends went to school. So I have a lot of history in this area. What we also see is these little blocks. Okay, and those are sewage disposal sites. So, and it says here, there's no dumping of sewage sludge in the ocean after 1981. This was partially due to the Clean Water Act, which was passed in 1972. Clean Water Act, passed by Congress, enforced by EPA. This, if you look at the timing, Clean Water Act was actually, EPA was created by Richard Nixon, and the Clean Water Act was largely supported by him as well. And the Clean Water Act said, hey, that stuff is disgusting. You gotta stop dumping sewage sludge in the ocean, with a few exceptions. For, largely, big cities, such as New York and Philadelphia. So New York and Philadelphia were allowed to dump their sewage off the coast because they have so much of it. Where else are you going to send it? And so they have these sites, first shallow water sites, and then some deeper sites in 1986 over here, shallow water over here. If you can guess my age, you would know that this is where my childhood poop actually resides. It was dumped off of the coast of Long Island in New Jersey, and later South New Jersey, and that's pretty gross. You can see here, if you look really closely, you see the bathymetric lines. This is deeper than 1,000 meters. But this over here, this bathymetric line is only 40 meters, which means that this stuff, this particular grouping of my childhood poop, was dumped in like 20 meters of water, which is not a decision I would have made, but I was too young to make that decision at the time, and so that decision was made for me. This was not good for fish, as you can imagine. Dumping a bunch of poop in the ocean in shallow water does not make the fish happy. And so all sewage was now disposed on land as of 1993, at least in the United States, because we figured out, hey, this is a really bad idea. Have you ever heard the term dilution is the solution to pollution? It's not true, but this is what people thought back in the day. They thought, oh, it's a really big ocean. You can just dump it out there. It'll be fine. That's not true. It is a big ocean. You can't just dump stuff in it because it has impacts on the ocean, especially right in your backyard, shallower than 20 meters of water. Give me a break. What are you thinking? Okay, so that's sewage pollution. Moving on, I talk about dichlorodiphenyl tricholine, or DDT, as it's known. DDT is an insecticide that was used widely in the 1950s and banned in 1972 in the US. It's still used overseas. If you look up, go to the YouTubes, the YouTubes thing that you're watching this video on probably right now, and just look up DDT hose children, fire hose children. And you'll see these these videos proclaiming how safe DDT is by dousing children with them from the 1950s. It turns out it's not that it's harmful to humans. It's not that it's harmful to humans, but it is really bad for other animals. It causes thin shells for bird eggs, which was the ultimate cause for its ban. Before you read the slide, 251ers, those of us that are, well, even if you're not, but if you think about America, I was going to say those of us that are American citizens will probably know this answer faster. Think about America. What is our biggest symbol, right? What do you think about America? What do you think about? You think about bald eagles, badass bald eagles, right? National symbol. Bald eagles almost went extinct because of DDT, and that's when people were like, whoa, you gotta stop, this is bad news. Peregrine falcons also almost went extinct because DDT causes their shells to be really thin, and the chicks, they don't survive. So, and the reason that we talk about DDT is actually a few reasons. So this DDT is one of the first cases you could point to where an environmentalist, in this case a woman named Rachel Carson, pointed out the problem. She wrote a book called Silent Spring. If you haven't heard of it, you better learn that name. And she wrote a book called Silent Spring that basically said, hey, we are poisoning our environment and this is having bad effects on us. Rachel Carson, actually she's an oceanographer, was an oceanographer, she passed away. And she essentially started the environmentalist movement, the environmental movement in the United States, which gives her the label of ultimate badass. So Rachel Carson, super badass, wrote a book that said, we gotta stop doing this, we're ruining our environment, which is bad for us, in addition to being bad for the environment, and that helped lead to the banning of DDT. Okay, so we don't use DDT anymore in the US. However, I do want to point out that sometimes life is not black and white. So DDT is clearly, it's bad for birds, right? And it kills insects, which is great, but it's bad for birds and other forms of higher life, and so that's why we stopped using it in the US. But we love profits and we don't care about other people. That's one of the things about our country that just happens to be the case. And so we sell it overseas to other countries where it's not illegal. When I say it's not black and white, though, here's the thing. DDT, one of the places they still use DDT is in Africa and Indonesia, in areas where they have tsetse flies. Tsetse flies are insects that are killed by DDT. And so DDT is bad for the birds, but tsetse flies give you malaria, right? I think it's tsetse flies. There's flies, insects that give you malaria, which is a really big killer over in Africa. And so for them, they're saving a lot of human lives by using DDT, even though maybe it's not so good for the birds. And so it's not, again, science is straightforward. DDT is bad for birds. That's why we stopped using it here. We don't have a big problem with tsetse flies and malaria. So we can do that. But in other places in the world, DDT actually helps them, right? So I thought I'd take something away from Rachel Carson. She's badass. You cannot say anything bad about her. I will come, I will find you, I will punch you in the face. But in general, right? The science can be straightforward, but sometimes you bring humans and sociology into it, and it gets a little more interesting. So DDT is still used in these other countries to prevent malaria. Another fun pollutant is mercury, in particular methyl mercury. So mercury itself is an element. Mercury is an element. Super useful. It's a metal that is liquid at room temperature, which on its own is really cool. So at room temperature, it's a metal, but it's liquid. That makes it really great for things like thermometers and some other things as well. It turns out that microbes, my favorite types of organisms, microbes turn mercury, which itself is not really a problem, into methyl mercury, which is a big problem for humans, really bad for humans. So thanks, microbes. Methyl mercury is concentrated in organisms through a process called bioaccumulation, and therefore successively higher trophic levels have more and more of it, and that's called biomagnification. Okay, so we're going to get this through our heads. If you eat something and it's concentrated in your bloodstream, it's bioaccumulated within one organism. If something eats you, I hope, 251ers, you know that I like you. I hope that you're never eaten by something. But if you are eaten by something and you've had something already accumulated in you, and that is further concentrated in that higher organism that ate you, it could be a lower organism if it was like killed by like bacteria or something. But no, it's going up the food chain. So a higher organism, that is biomagnification. The process of basically successively increasing the concentration of something within organisms as you go up the food chain, that is called biomagnification. Bioaccumulation is within one organism. Biomagnification is successive bioaccumulations up the food chain. So get that through your cute little 251 skulls. We have some cartoons here to help you. We have a band of tunas playing some rock and roll. It says heavy metal in the marine environment. Actually, they're playing metal. They might be playing Napalm Death or Black Sabbath. The lyrics of the song go, well, I am the tuna, and you know I'm dolphin free, right? Because we'll talk about that later, but people used to catch tuna by following around dolphins, which also like tuna, and so they would follow dolphin pods to catch the tunas and kill many, many dolphins in the process. We don't do that anymore. So dolphin-free tuna, that's why it's called that. But baby, I'm loaded with methyl mercury. Oh, that's bad. That's not going to be good. And tuna are high up the food chain, so they might have a lot of methyl mercury in them. Let's look at a real example here. Let's look at a real example here that has actual numbers. So this is with DDT, biological magnification or biomagnification of DDT up the food chain. There's only a little bit of it in seawater. This is 3 10 to the negative 6 in water, 0.000003, not very much. In water, then some zooplankton accumulated into their bloodstream, probably by eating microbes. And you see it's already magnified, this is 1,000 times, 0.4 parts per million zooplankton. Little small fish eat those zooplankton. Zooplankton are tiny animals. I'm sorry, we can talk about those when we get to the biology chapters. Zooplankton are tiny animals floating around the ocean. They're eaten by small fish. It's biomagnified to 0.5 parts per million, so it's accumulated 10 times higher concentration. A large fish eats that. It's about 5 times higher concentration in that large fish. And then birds eat that large fish, and it's another 10 times higher. So it's gone from 0.000003 parts per million to 25 parts per million. That's an accumulation or magnification of about 10 million times. Right? And so a little tiny bit in the water, it's not so much. A lot in that bird is a problem. The reason this can happen is basically because of fractionation. Organisms are selectively keeping it. So even though the concentration starts off very low, organisms are kind of selectively keeping it in their bloodstream, and so it concentrates or magnifies the concentration as you go higher up the food chain, and so that's really bad for a bird. So, and you can see here, same idea in cartoon form with, this is probably mercury. This is concentration of a pollutant, but starts off with a little bit in the zooplankton, some in the water, not deadly. Go to a fish, there's a little more, dangerous. Go to that bigger fish, even more dangerous, and go to this fisherman, and he's like, no! His mouth is wide open. Potentially very dangerous. Okay. This, by the way, when this makes it all the way up the food chain into humans, if you have too much, if you eat fish that have high concentrations of methylmercury, you can get, if you do that for a long period of time, you can get something called Minamata disease. Minamata was a town in Japan. So methylmercury biomagnification in humans can result in neurological diseases and physical deformities. This is named Minamata disease because industrial waste was dumped into a bay by a company that knew what they were doing in Japan, where locals ate seafood, and it resulted in an outbreak of this disease, which was previously unnamed, in the town of Minamata, Japan, during 1956 to 1968. So over the course of 8 years, there was an outbreak of this horrible disease with neurological conditions. If you have ever been to Japan, or maybe you've just heard about things, or maybe you just know that sushi is a Japanese word. I think it's a Japanese word. It's definitely food that originates in Japan. They eat a lot of fish in general. That's a really big part of their diet, and particularly in this town that's, you know, in the 50s, kind of pre-industrialization in that particular part of Japan. They would have fish every day, right? And so it resulted in this outbreak. And this photograph here is from a gentleman, W. Gene Smith. So those of you who know me might know that I really like photography. W. Gene Smith was a photographer that was particularly interested in social activism and tried to point his camera towards problems that he thought needed to be fixed. And so he has this really moving and horribly depressing series about this mother and her son that had this horrible disease. With the mother's permission, she actually wanted him to do this work so that people could see this disease and how horrible it was, and it did lead to them stopping dumping it in that environment. So W. Gene Smith is worth looking up, looking at some of the work that he's done. So this Minamata disease, it turns out the reason that it's really bad in humans is that the human placenta, right, the thing that is attached to a baby and feeding it, not to a baby, to a fetus, and feeding the fetus in utero, the placenta actually amplifies the toxin. So even within the mother, it's biomagnified another level in the fetus. And so it's really, really dangerous. And this is why people, pregnant women in the US, are told not to eat tuna. US doctors, they have like a yes or no type of attitude with things. People eat tuna in Japan when they're pregnant, and in general they're fine except for this particular period. So I don't think all tuna is bad for you, but it's a particular problem. Methylmercury bioaccumulation. Ooh, it's a tongue twister. It's a particular problem in tuna. So that's why, if you're ever wondering why the doctor tells you not to eat mercury if you're a lady in the audience and you are pregnant, you'll probably be told to stay away from too much sushi. This is the reason why. Whew. Oh, 251ers. We're really blowing through it. Okay. Get my cup over here. So, a few more slides. I want to talk about point and non-point sources. This is an important concept when we're thinking about pollution and how to control it and where it's coming from. If you want to control it, you need to know where it's coming from. So point sources are pollution discharged from one specific spot. And so, in the example of this town, Minamata, in the coastal area, this one company was dumping their waste into a bay, right? That's a point. It's a point source. We know where it came from. It's one particular location, discharged from a chemical plant or a sewage pipe. That would be an example of a point source. Non-point sources are pollution from a range or multiple sources. Usually you can't, a non-point source, we know that there's some sort of pollution, but we can't pinpoint to one exact place where it is. And this could be runoff from a farm, poop, from rain, road oil. Sorry, I'm supposed to be Skyping with somebody, but I will do that in a few minutes when I'm done with the lecture. So any of those things, right? The reason that it's important to know this is non-point sources of pollution are much harder, much harder to control and manage than point sources because they're coming from all over the place and it's hard to pinpoint how to stop something that you either don't know where it's coming in from or has a really large range of area in which it's entering the environment. If it's just coming from one particular place, it's a lot easier to be like, hey, let's take these steps to mitigate that thing that you're releasing into the environment. So point sources and non-point sources. So in the last section that we're going to talk about are plastics. So plastics represent a vast majority of marine debris. About 80% of marine debris is actually from land sources, and most of it is plastic. The problem, as you may know, it's in the news a lot, plastic is not biodegradable. Not readily biodegradable. It takes a really long time. There are components that will break down into smaller pieces, but then those smaller pieces can persist for probably hundreds of years. We don't really know yet. They can entangle fish, marine mammals, and birds, especially larger plastic waste. Plastic bags can choke turtles who have small brains. Imagine you're swimming around and you like eating jellyfish, right? And you see a plastic bag floating around. You might think that's a jellyfish. So they eat them thinking that they're jellyfish, and that's the end of that turtle. And some plastics also can accumulate or attract poisons because things will stick to the plastics and then be carried around with it, like DDT and PCBs. So the biggest problems or problem makers in the plastic world are nurdles and microplastics. Fun words, big problem. Nurdles are small pre-production pellets. They're found in the ocean and beaches, usually due to spillage. In Orange County, California, in one example, 98% of the beach debris they find there are nurdles. That would indicate that there's probably a point source, somewhere in Orange County, or that the currents happen to take these things there. Microbeads are small plastic beads, about 1 to 5 millimeters, that you find, 251ers, in cleaners and scrubbers. Things like, we've all been there, exfoliating scrubs and toothpaste, when they're like, you rub it on your face, it's got the little tiny plastic beads, and I don't know, it causes some friction and makes your face a lot cleaner. Stop using those. Stop using those. Those are really bad for the environment, and they're not necessary. This is an easy fix. Just stop using them. You don't need them. But those are microbeads. I used to use those soaps before I knew better. Sometimes they're in toothpaste, hand cleaners. You don't need them. So these pollutants, they make it out to the ocean. They're eaten by fish. And perhaps you've heard of the Pacific garbage patch, 46 million pounds of this stuff in the Pacific Ocean. So despite what the text seems to say, there are no patches of garbage in the subtropical gyres, but rather areas with higher concentrations. So this is a figure from NOAA that illustrates the the western Pacific garbage patch and the eastern Pacific garbage patch. If you are in an oceanography class, so you're looking at this map and saying, hey, that looks like the North Pacific subtropical gyre. Very good, 251ers, it is. It is. And they tend to get these plastics that are floating in the ocean. They're really small, but they're floating in the ocean. They tend to get concentrated in the corners of these gyres. So again, this is something that we can fix, right? It's bad, but we can fix these. And the best way to approach them, we really like plastics. Plastics are pretty wonderful for a lot of uses, but there are some things that we use them for that maybe we don't need to. So stop using single-use plastics as much as possible. It's not always possible, right? But a lot of times, we go somewhere and we buy like a water bottle and we use it once and we throw it out. If it's not being recycled, that's garbage, might end up in the ocean. And it's not necessary. We could just use reusable containers, use plastic, especially plastic bags. Guess what? China. It's a really big country. It's like over 1 billion people there. China just said, we're not using plastic bags anymore. They can do that. They have an authoritarian government, so it can make things happen if it wants to, much more easily than nationwide changes in the US, which are a little bit more difficult to implement. However, they did it, and that is going to have a huge, huge impact on reduction in plastic bags. So, sometimes I still get plastic bags every now and then because I use them to throw garbage out, and I use them to line garbage bins. But not every time, right? And you can, I just keep in my trunk, I know, I sound like an old tree hugger, but I just keep in my trunk a bunch of canvas reusable bags, and when I go food shopping, they're there and ready to be used. 24 countries have banned them. See, I got ahead of myself, including China. So this is a fixable problem. Stop using those stupid face soaps. I've seen, not that many of you 251ers, but the ones that I have seen of you, and I'm sure the ones that I haven't seen of you, you're all beautiful. You don't need the face soaps with the plastic stuff in them. You're fine. You look beautiful without them. And the last thing we're going to talk about is biological pollution, or invasive species. Invasive species are species that originate elsewhere, introduced by humans intentionally, sometimes, or most often accidentally. Outcompete and dominate native populations. Invasive species cause extensive damage annually. In the oceans, ship ballast is a big source of invasive species, especially small things that fit in ship ballast. So ships need to balance when they're at sea. They'll take in water and use it to balance them. Usually they'll take it in a little bit away from port, travel across the world with that water that they got from, let's say, just off of Houston. Travel to, maybe they're delivering something to Africa, and then they dump that water when they get closer to Africa, right? So they're carrying things with them across the sea. That's a really hard thing to prevent. That's how ships operate, but this is one way that we know invasive species is spread. 251ers, we're here in Texas. We're here in Texas. Whoa. What's our least favorite invasive species? Fire ants. Fire ants are an invasive species. We hate them. I hate them. They're the worst. Nutria also. They're really cute. But they have just taken over and dominated the environment. And they're not from around here. And I'll end with some examples of invasive species. Caulerpa taxifolia are native to Hawaii, but invasive to California and the Mediterranean. This is this species that are really nice in Hawaii, but they've taken over in coastal California, the Mediterranean. Zebra mussels are a big problem in lakes. They're native to Russia, but they invaded us, jerks, and they're destructive to lake ecosystems. So zebra mussels, in particular zebra mussels in the Great Lakes, they actually overfilter the water and they take over the environment, and not good. And lionfish, native to the Western Pacific and Indian Oceans. They're really beautiful species, beautiful fish, but they're invasive to the US and they're really destructive to reef ecosystems. So bad that people are encouraged. I knew that was going to happen. Sorry, I got cut off. This camera cuts off. Judge was telling me to look out, but I don't always listen to him because he writes weird stuff about me on the board. I got cut off as I was talking about zebra mussels and saying people want to get rid of them so badly that they're encouraged to spearfish them in the Caribbean, right? Because the way that you get invasive species, the reason we call them invasive is basically something is brought over accidentally or on purpose. I'm going to get her in a minute. And it has no natural predators in a particular environment, and so it's able to kind of thrive and over-thrive, really, and totally take over an environment. That is what an invasive species is. And so it's not good for the environment because it kind of kills all the things that are, or outcompetes all the things that are naturally there. So, guess what? Guess what? We did it. That's it. That's it. We're done with marine pollution. So I hope that you've learned some things in this chapter. After this, the next 4 chapters are all about biology. Marine biological oceanography, marine biology, things that are near and dear to my heart, near and dear to your heart. You know you want to hear about whales and dolphins. You're going to hear about whales and dolphins. I know that a lot of you signed up to hear about them, and I promise you are going to hear, they're awesome. So we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about sharks. We're going to talk about bacteria, phytoplankton, all the cool stuff. That's the end of chapter 11, marine pollution. We'll see you in the next chapter. And until then, toodaloos. Thank you for listening. Hope you learned something. Be good people. See you later.